Hey everybody, my name's Kris from Amerikos.com, where we help you level up and show the world the best version of yourself. And in today's video, I'm going to talk to you about why you don't need to sound like a native speaker, and not trying to sound like a native speaker might actually make you sound more natural and more native. There are people who speak English all over the world in different countries, and they all sound a little different. A person who grew up and lived in Australia sounds different from a person who grew up and lived in Canada. And although they can understand each other, the differences are in how they pronounce some words and phrases, and also the words that they choose to use. And if we talk about written English, then there are more differences. But what's really the difference between a native speaker and a non-native speaker? This is a discussion that has become more and more important in the last 10, 20 years, and they've even put a name to it. They call it native speakerism. Native speakerism, when we're talking about English, usually describes how native speakers have some level of superiority or some positions that are easier or better for them because they are native speakers of the language. But what does native speaker really mean? Most people define native speaker as a person who was born in an English-speaking country, born in an English-speaking family, and has spoken English as their first language all of their life. But how you define a native speaker differs when you start to talk to real people. For example, if a person was born into a family where Spanish was the first language, but they were born in an English-speaking country, and they grew up speaking English at school with their friends and everyone outside of their family, well, their English might sound like a native. They might speak without major mistakes, and they might speak without any noticeable foreign accent. So they're native, right? Some people would agree and say, yes, that's a native speaker because they've been speaking English all their life and they learned it as a child, so it's also a first language. They have two first languages, Spanish and English. However, some other people might say, well, their family speaks Spanish at home, and that means that they're not a native speaker of English, they're only a native speaker of Spanish. Because some people believe you can only be a native speaker of one language, which to me doesn't sound accurate at all. And then we have other cases, like what if both of your parents are from England, but they were living in Germany when you were born, and you were born in Germany, but you grew up speaking English at home, and then your family moved back to England, and you never learned German. Are you German or are you English? Well, probably you're a native speaker of English, even though you were born in a different country. So really, this tells us that the place you were born doesn't influence whether you're a native speaker of a language or not. It also tells us that the family you're born into might speak a different language at home, and you might be a native speaker of that language in addition to the language that is spoken in society, in your school, or by the people around you. As a child, it's very easy for you to adapt to 2 or 3 or 4 different groups of people speaking different languages, and for you to pick up those language systems and start using them. After all, speaking a language as a child is much different from speaking a language as an adult. You don't need to talk about a lot of abstract ideas, and you don't need to process complicated grammar rules. Plus, when you make small mistakes in the language, you're not as self-conscious as adults are, and most people aren't going to judge you harshly for making those small mistakes. Probably the most ironic part of all of this is that people who are called non-native speakers typically are trying to learn a language to the level at which native speakers speak the language. However, the native speakers who are speaking the language typically have forgotten a lot of the rules of why they speak the language that way. And there are some classic native speaker mistakes that they might make. So non-native speakers are trying to learn to speak like the people who don't speak correctly. Let me say that in a different way for you. Non-native speakers are trying to learn the rules of the language so that they can speak like the people who have forgotten the rules of the language. That's very ironic. And that's really the problem of trying to sound like a native speaker. So many people are trying to do this, and they actually end up sounding less natural because they're trying to do this. Instead of trying to sound like a native speaker or a person who is from a different country than you're really from, why not own the identity that you have? You are from a place. That makes you unique and special. You have a background, you have experience. Use that to characterize who you are. Yes, you can improve your grammar, your fluency. You can enlarge your vocabulary, and you can follow pronunciation rules so that you sound more fluent and so that you blend into the groups of people that you're in. If you come to the United States, where I'm from, and you speak British English or you pronounce words in the British English way, then people are still going to look at you like you're not from here. The sounds of the words and phrases are going to be different from how a local person speaks. So what's better, to sound like a person from England speaking in the United States, or to sound like a person from Mexico who's speaking in the United States, or to sound like a person from Italy who's speaking in the United States? Honestly, accents and differences in pronunciation give you character. They give you something special. And it's more interesting for the people who hear you speak to hear these different sounds and different ways of saying the words that they've said the same way for years and years. That's why so many people enjoy listening to foreign accents. Even the word accent is something that many English learners don't understand. The word accent in English just describes how you speak because of where you come from. It doesn't mean that you speak incorrectly. It means that you speak with certain characteristics. A lot of my students say, I'm so frustrated, I went to the supermarket and I wanted to buy something, and the person looked at me and said, oh, where are you from? And that means that they heard my accent. So that means that my English isn't very good. And I look at them and I say, what are you talking about? Your English is great. They asked where you're from because they're interested in knowing more about you. They want to meet you. You're different from the usual person they meet, and they're interested. It doesn't mean that you did something wrong, and it doesn't mean that your English is bad. Everybody has an accent in English. That's something that you have to understand. A person from New York has a New York accent. A person from London has a London accent. And that doesn't mean that people from New York or people from London speak incorrectly. It just means that there's a special way that people from that place speak. They say the sounds a little differently. So if you want to sound natural, you have to have an accent. That's what so many people don't understand. They try to reduce their accent or eliminate their accent, and that's impossible. You can't get rid of your accent. You can just add more sounds to the way that you pronounce things so that when you're in one place speaking with one group of people, you know that it's going to be more understandable if you use these speech patterns or these types of pronunciation. And you know what? I have to do the same thing. When I'm speaking with people from different places, sometimes the way that I naturally pronounce a word is very different from the way that they pronounce it. And at first, they might not understand what I'm saying to them. Even if they're a native speaker, they might not understand what I'm saying because the word that I'm choosing to use or the way that I'm pronouncing that word is very different from the way that they say that. So if you're learning English, don't focus on sounding like a native speaker. Learn the grammar rules, learn vocabulary. Those things are important. But when it comes to pronunciation, you need to focus more on how words are stressed and how words connect to one another so that the sentences flow. Don't try to sound like a person from another place. If you go to that place, then you'll have lots of examples of how people sound from that place. And it will be a lot easier for you to adjust your pronunciation and blend in with that group of people. But it doesn't make sense to sound like those people if you're not going to have any contact with those people. Again, another example, if you speak like the Queen of England and you go to California, that's not going to help you. And it doesn't matter if you speak correctly or not if no one can understand you. Languages are meant to be communicated and understood. It's a way that we share information. It's not a tool that we use just to be right or to be better than other people. There are millions and millions of people who speak English incorrectly, and they are native speakers. And yes, it's difficult to understand them sometimes. Speaking like a native speaker means that sometimes people say, "Oh, I like your accent. Where are you from?" You see, speaking like a native speaker is exactly the same as speaking like a non-native speaker. All of the same things happen. The difference is that a person who is a native speaker doesn't worry about that. They're not trying to sound like someone else. They just speak and they just use the language. So the sooner you stop thinking of yourself as a non-native speaker, the sooner you will actually speak like a native speaker. Don't try to sound like a native speaker. Just stop trying to sound like other people and start sounding like you. Thank you so much for watching this video. Make sure you press like, press subscribe, leave a comment down below, and I will see you in the next video. Bye-bye.